Hey everyone, welcome to I think this may be our fifth or fourth episode of Get Baked. Get Baked is a new show brought to you by the founders of BakeSpace.com, myself, Babette Pepai, and Nichelle Stevens with Cupcakes Take the Cake. This series is very cool because we take some of the greatest people we know that are in baking and also people who know a lot of stuff about different topics, cookbook authors, food bloggers, home cooks who are like killer in the topic, and we bring them all to talk to you every single week. We have a new show, and we're going to be doing a show on gluten-free baking today, so we're super excited about it. Let me introduce my co-host, Nichelle Stevens. Nichelle, do you want to tell folks a little bit about you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nichelle Stevens. I am a longtime cupcake blogger. I'm also the cupcake expert on Cupcakes.about.com and the co-producer of Tech Munch New York and Tech Munch Atlanta.
Awesome. Those of you who are watching at home, there's a few ways you can participate live on the show. First of all, you can go to our YouTube channel, BakeSpace TV. We are chatting there live. You can also watch us on Google+, and we're also, we just tweeted it out on our Twitter handle, so the video's there if you guys want to check it out. It's also on BakeSpace.com. If you have any questions, use the GetBaked hashtag. That's what we're following. Nichelle, do you want to follow the Twitter conversation?
Yes, I will follow the Twitter conversation.
Cool, and I will go to Google Plus in a second or so and see if anyone's checking in and to see who's hanging out with us today. Let me introduce our guests. I'm going to read everyone's names so I make sure I don't mispronounce everyone's names. Kristine Kidd, who has been with Bon Appetit magazine for like 20 years. She was the food editor there, so I think from right there, like anyone we have extra is like icing on the cake. But this is probably one of our biggest shows, I would say, because we also have Shauna Ahern, who is Gluten-Free Girl. If you guys do not go to glutenfreegirl.com, you should definitely check out the website for sure. If you want anything gluten-free, the stories, the pictures, the recipes, the cookbooks, just by far, you just got to check her out. We also have Dr. Jean Layton, who's glutenfreedoctor.com. I love this doctor sort of the science behind it. Dr. Jean has been on Google+. She has been doing her own Hangouts. We're absolutely thrilled to have her today. And then our fourth recommendation, our fourth guest who we recommend that you guys go and check out for sure after the show is Rachel. Now, Rachel, do you say your last name Edington?
Yep, Edington.
No, she's Gluten-Free Mama, and Rachel and I met because she came onto BakeSpace and created a cookbook, and I thought, oh man, this is awesome. I love gluten-free recipes, and we got to get you on the show to talk. So I'm super excited about getting these amazing minds in. So why don't we start with Kristine? Kristine, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell the folks a little bit about your background and then how gluten-free came into your world?
Sure. As Babette mentioned, I was the food editor at Bon Appetit magazine for about 20 years, and I left the magazine 5 years ago, and I discovered I had celiac disease. And as a food editor at Bon Appetit magazine, I was determined to eat as deliciously as I always had. So I spent a year in the kitchen developing fabulous recipes, which for me meant really fresh, wholesome, natural food. And I came out with my first book, Weeknight Gluten-Free. Then I started really missing cookies and cakes and pies, and so I spent a year working on developing gluten-free baking recipes, and I have my second gluten-free book, Gluten-Free Baking.
Which was the book that was the hardest to write?
Oh, gluten-free baking. Baking is much more difficult. In the first book, I find kind of natural ways to deal with working around gluten, but the baking is a whole science of its own.
You know, go ahead.
For my baking, I was really determined to use as many naturally gluten-free products as I could and really stay away from what I call the other white starches, which really have no nutritional value. And my approach is really to make things that are delicious on their own, not copies of things that are really better when they're made with wheat flour.
Well, when Nichelle and I were thinking about some of the topics to cover for the show, gluten-free came up because I thought, baking, it seems so difficult. There's so many ready-made products that are out there as well that I think you can get sort of a little, I don't want to say lazy, but you can get seduced by going to the store and getting the bread that's already there. Is it way better to make everything at home?
Yeah. I think it is. I think it makes a huge difference. Most of the prepared products are really made mostly with white starches. They tend to be really high in sugar. They tend to be high in fat, whereas you can make really naturally delicious things using all the other wonderful gluten-free grains that are available. Things like sorghum and millet and buckwheat and teff.
Well, it sounds like they sound like rock bands.
That interpretation.
Well, let's ask Rachel. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about your website and how you made that transition into the gluten-free world.
Well, I started because of my daughter. She was very sick for 18 months, always screaming, vomiting every time she ate. Can you guys see me? Because I lost you here.
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, so she was so sick, and we finally found a naturopath doctor that did the celiac testing, and so she was celiac. I just tried to bake everything, and it was kind of falling apart. It was gritty. It was bland. I hated mixing 5 different flours, and so I just started creating my own recipes, and it started off with, I take the regular version and my version, and I took it around town, let people choose, blind taste test, and they were always choosing mine. So I thought, hey, I've always wanted to write a cookbook, and I started, and then next thing you know, I have 7 products that I'm selling nationwide, and I'm working on my second cookbook and in over my head. But it's been so much fun.
It sounds like you're on the right path. So I think Nichelle would probably agree with me. Now, Shauna, do you want to tell us a little bit about your website and then your journey into, because we've had you on the show before, but maybe for the folks who are tuning in for the first time, do you want to share a little bit about that, and also how your husband's involved and sort of the story behind the massive brand that you have?
Hi, I'm a massive brand. How are you? Yeah, absolutely. I started my website, as many of us did. I started it out of illness and out of exhaustion and out of not knowing what was wrong with me. There are a lot of people out there who are suffering for no reason whatsoever. And all of us here on the panel want to give them a sense of not only of health, but also that they can have tremendous, delicious food without the gluten. I think we live in a really interesting culture that is over-privileged wheat. And when I first started, I began by, like Kristine did, I just wanted every vegetable, every ingredient. My motto was, if it doesn't have gluten in it, I'm eating it. And that led me to foods I'd never discovered before. But I've always been a baker, and what I realized was not so much that I actually missed eating the chocolate chip cookies myself, although I do enjoy that, but that I missed the experience of baking. I missed the smell of the warm cookies coming out of the oven and the look on people's faces when I handed them. And even more than that, when they were gluten-free people and they didn't have to feel like, oh, this is substitute baked goods or this is just barely good enough baked goods. In a lot of cases, what I've discovered over the last 10 years, many baked goods are actually better without gluten than they are with gluten. And I think that that's still what we're trying to do, convey that message to the general population. Because people feel like you have to eat wheat in order to have a good life, which isn't true. But they also think you have to eat wheat to make muffins or cookies or kind of the traditional, home baker's baked goods. Not only do you not need gluten for those, but I think in a lot of cases they're better without gluten. And so what I've been doing with my husband, who is a professional chef and can eat gluten, he's kind of my secret weapon. And what I'll do is make something and he'll say, yeah, not good enough. And we're both stubborn, so we'll go back to it. What I found is that instead of trying to replicate white flour, I'm not interested in white flour. Bleached wheat flour is what made me sick in the first place. So I'm trying, like Kristine said, I can use millet, to use sorghum, to use buckwheat. Some starches judiciously when they're necessary to give you kind of lift and rise. But I want to create great baked goods. I don't want anyone to ever talk about the fact that it's gluten-free. And so I've written 3 cookbooks now, plus a food memoir. The fourth book is coming out in September. And we just launched our own flour line, which I have an entire group of flours coming in. Excuse me, my phone is...
Oh, now I feel like you got to answer the phone and put them on speaker.
No, but I feel like Vanna White. I'm in our cooking studio, and we have an entire cupboard full of our gluten-free flours, which just arrived. And I created these flours so people could feel like they have one flour they can trust. They can pull out the cupboard and just start baking. And I think probably more than anything, that's what people miss, is a really great flour blend they can trust. They don't have to think about it. So that's part of what we've been doing too.
Absolutely. Well, we're definitely going to talk more about that stuff. I want to make sure I get to Dr. Jean before we move on to some of the other questions that I have, because I'm like a total newbie with the gluten-free, though it makes me feel better when I eat gluten-free, and I don't know if that's psychosomatic or if that's just because it's a better fit. But Dr. Jean, let's talk about you. How did you, first of all, a little bit about your background being a doctor, and then also how did you transition, because your whole brand, your whole you're gluten-free doctor. I mean, you can't get more specific than that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that sort of transition? And did you find out that you were gluten-free and you're like, oh no, what do I do?
No, I never worried about, oh no, what do I do? Because I was a chef in New York before I became a doctor. So for my family, because it's my whole family that's gluten-free, we started the discovery with my husband breaking his leg ice skating with our daughters. Broke the biggest bone in his body, which the trauma was nowhere near enough.
Which bone is that? I got to know which bone.
The femur. Top of the leg. Okay, so he fell and shattered it and discovered he had osteoporosis, and he was 43, 44. Totally unlikely presentation. And what happened was we started the research after he broke his leg and discovered he had osteoporosis, and realized that his family history, the genetics, went back, and there were indicators all the way along, but nobody had done any blood work. And then we started looking at downstream. We started looking at our daughters, and at that point they were first graders and had got into school with the typical American diet, right? A sandwich, a cookie, some sort of wheat-based snack, chip or whatever, and they had plateaued in their growth. Now, I'm a totally anal mom, Dr. Mom. I had actually been measuring their growth pattern every month on their birthday since they could stand. So I had a really good amount of data, and they plateaued as soon as they started school. So we looked at Ed, and we looked at the girls and said, well, it's time to take gluten out of their life. Now, mind you, this is now 8 years ago. And at that point, trying to convince a doctor to run the blood work was at best complicated, and at worst, they were saying, well, you're going to have to pay for all the biopsies and everything. So we didn't do the biopsies because I looked at it and said, gee, what's our option? A gluten-free diet lifelong or a biopsy in a gluten-free diet lifelong? We could make that decision for us and for our daughters because we knew them. And then I looked at my life and realized that I had gone wheat-free while in naturopathic medical school and felt 100% better. But there were still those niggly things. Like I switched to a lot of spelt flour at that point and was still eating barley and still eating rye. And so whenever I had those, I wasn't feeling great. Took the whole family gluten-free, 100%. We all felt better. Ed's bone density came back. And that's when I started writing because it was sheer documentation at that point. It was, okay, my kids still want pancakes. Now what do I do? And it was documentation of what they needed and how I made things change. But I'm a geek. I'm a science geek. So I kept looking at the chemistry of baking. It's different for gluten-free than it is for gluten-full. But that doesn't mean it's not fun. It's actually more fun. We get more flours to play with. We get more grains to play with. We start to work in things that people look at you and go, what the heck is xanthan gum? And after a while, I started saying the same thing because I don't use any xanthan gum anymore. I use what I call pixie dust, which is a mixture of seeds. Because it's a cellulose base, and it's getting enough cellulose to replicate the structure. So for me, it's been a lot of fun. I wrote Gluten-Free Baking for Dummies, the Crazy Dummies series back in, I think it was 2011, can't remember now. Still in print. People still use it as an initial changeover book. The whole first part is how do you go gluten-free? How do you make the transition? How do you stay gluten-free in situations that typically are full of wheat or rye or barley? And my blog has been a documentation of what do you do with little kids and how do you make sure that the Play-Doh doesn't get into their lives and how do you make sure finger paints aren't gluten-full and all of that kind of stuff.
Finger paint.
And I still see patients. Yeah, finger painting. Finger paint's a very common.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
That's
I still see patients, but not as many because I've kind of moved into the world of social media. And so I run hangouts for brands. I run conversations for different people. And I teach about social media and how to use this kind of platform to convey your own story. So for me, that's a lot of fun.
We were so happy when you said yes to be part of our show because I was like, oh, that rounds out just the conversation so nicely. I do want to make sure our friends over on Google Plus right now. Jim Best also said, hi, all. I'm here, no webcam, at his work computer. So we say, hey, what's up, Jim? We're glad to have you. Michelle, anyone on Twitter yet chatting?
No.
For those of you who are on Twitter who are afraid to comment, use the hashtag #GetBaked. If you're watching this post live show, every week we have a new show on Sunday. If you use the hashtag #GetBaked and we see that's relevant to one of our shows, we'll go back and reach out to all of our speakers, all of our panelists, and see if they'll answer your question for you. So if you're seeing this on YouTube in a few months, welcome. We are happy to have you here. Subscribe to us on YouTube, please, so that you can get updated on all of our shows. Next week's show is about chocolate. Now let's talk about the transition to gluten-free. Now what is like the typical experience that happens when somebody gets that message? When somebody gets that like Nichelle, have you ever had any gluten-free stuff? Like
Yes. I pretty much had a cupcake in all different kind of ways.
But you've never had someone tell you need to eat gluten, right?
No. But I have a question to Jean because I first had something that I thought was gluten-free. It had spelt flour, and then later on I found out it wasn't gluten-free. So what is spelt? Because I think some people think that's gluten-free.
There are a couple of grains that people get confused about. Spelt, triticale are actual ancient grain forms of wheat. So they're not the hybridized modern wheat. They're throwbacks is the best way to think about it. But they're still wheat. They still have the gluten protein within them. And what happened about, I want to say 5 years ago, a lot of people started to hear about gluten-free, 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 and not understanding what that meant, they switched things to wheat, to spelt wheat or triticale, thinking that it was okay. And there were all sorts of confusions. And until we got some actual FDA rulings that said, no, here's the definition, people could pretty much say anything they wanted to, which is why you tend to cook your own or go to trusted sources for products. You know, right now I just came back from Natural Products Expo West, and at this point, if it doesn't say certified gluten-free, I'm not going to be encouraging people to eat it anymore because I saw so many products that were claiming gluten-free, and you read the product list and it says made in a facility with, and you kind of go, you know, doesn't match. The two claims don't match.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's scary. Yeah. So many I mean, now there's an entire section in a grocery store dedicated to gluten-free products. I mean, you cannot get away from the gluten-free thing. Now let's go to.
There is some good news about the labeling though. Now they cannot label their product gluten-free as of 2015 unless it is gluten-free. Has all the certification, it has not to be certified, but has all the ingredients that are gluten-free. However, they do have to list if it's baked, processed in a facility that also processes other things. So it's always good to look for the label on the back. They have Celiac Sprue Association label. That's the one that I'm certified through. There's a GIG label, and then there's one more. Shauna might know which one it is. Do you know which one it is, Shauna?
There's about 4 different ones.
Yeah. So
you
always look for the label.
Yeah. Look for the certified gluten-free.
Now, for folks who are new to gluten-free and they just get that doctor saying, your child needs to go gluten-free, what are like the first steps that you need to like clean out in the house? Like, what are the things that most people don't realize is the biggest culprit?
Soy sauce. Most people don't realize that soy sauce alone is enough to create a reaction. And then all the downstream products, right? So soy sauce is in every hoisin sauce that exists. It's in most oyster sauce. It's in barbecue sauce. It's in the coating on crackers. It's in everything Chinese, which is why that's not the best choice of restaurant to go out to. And for that's the one that captures a lot of people, and they just don't realize. They feel like heck when they eat, whatever, and they just don't realize. But I think the honest truth is most people, when they first get diagnosed, they have to grieve because it means their life is changing drastically. And you've got to give them the time to grieve the loss of the perfect French croissant and baguette, and then they can discover that they can actually create those. But first you got to let them mourn and encourage them to eat lots and lots of vegetables while they do.
Now, Shauna and Rachel and Kristine, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think. Oh, go ahead, Kristine.
Go ahead, Shauna.
No, you go.
You there?
Go ahead, Kristine.
You guys are all too polite.
Okay. Well, I say definitely go through your cupboards and throw out anything that has wheat in it or soy or different things. There is a soy sauce that is gluten-free. So you want to look for those labels. But the big thing for me is I tell people to clean out their kitchens, and like things that like plastic sources, those carry the gluten in them. So get rid of your plastic bowls and start fresh with some nice metal bowls that you can run through the dishwasher, things like that, and get a fresh toaster. And then I tell people, don't be so overwhelmed, because it is overwhelming. Take it one day at a time. And, start with maybe when you first diagnose with, fruits and vegetables and high proteins, and then start slowly integrating, baked goods as you start to learn how to do it. But first get your kitchen prepared, then that way you're not going to be so stressed out.
Now, Kristine, how about yourself, or Shauna?
Well, I think that the first area that people are going to have trouble with is all the prepared foods or the packaged foods that they have in their home. I think that's the very first place, because so many of those things have gluten in them. So they really need to go through and read every label when they've first been diagnosed. And then I think, embracing natural fresh food is the best way to start. And that means fruits, that means vegetables, that means rice and the grains other than wheat, enjoying potatoes. I think look at any of Shauna's books or my books. I have a book, Weeknight Gluten-Free. Shauna has a recent book all about everyday cooking. I'm forgetting the name. I'm sorry, Shauna. But those will really guide you through. I know, I was determined to eat naturally gluten-free, and it's really easy to do if you're looking at the fruits and the vegetables and the meats and potatoes, corn.
And then when you want to get into baking, you want to get Gluten-Free Mama's baking book, because I'm all about baking and making it taste good. So when you're ready to step outside the fruits and vegetables and things like that, then you can find good baked goods. Ones that taste better than anything that you would have bought that had wheat in it.
I want Shauna to say the title of her book, because it's such a beautiful book.
Thank you. It's Gluten-Free Girl Every Day. And, what I do is when I get friends or people I know who have just discovered their celiac, I like to, I say, go ahead and grieve, but I also say celebrate. You've been sick for a long time, and if you feel like you focus only on what you're eating, then you are going to forget that you're going to get well for all of this. And so I had a friend who just got diagnosed, and I said, let's make a really long list of all the foods you love, like peaches in August and the juice dripping down your chin, and a really good rare steak. And we spent like an hour just making a list of every food experience she loved that didn't have any gluten in it. And then I said, put it on your refrigerator. Whenever you're feeling lousy, just think, yeah, but look at all the food that is there for me. I have yes tattooed on my wrist, and I think that that's really guided me through all of this, which is, yes, I have celiac, I can't eat gluten. But as I like to joke, I got a book deal, a cookbook for a husband and child, 2 children, and I've never eaten vanilla winter well in my life. So I think it's important for us to breathe, but I also think it's really important for people to realize most Americans aren't eating very well. You know, when they're eating those packaged foods that she was talking about that's in their pantry, they're not eating good foods, they're eating non-foods. And so this is a chance for us to really find foods that feed us and that also make us feel good and learn to cook. You know, there's going to be a lot of stumbling places. But there are places where you just think, ooh, I'm in control of my own food and my own diet now. And you have no idea how good a roasted egg can be.
Hey, Shauna, I was gonna say your Wi-Fi is a little shaky. So when you talk, for some reason, I don't know why it's happening, but I think the rest of the folks are also experiencing this too.
Yeah.
When you talk, just project a little bit louder than you normally would, because we're all like anxiously like, what is she saying? But it's breaking up for some reason, and it's not that we don't hear what you're saying. It's just it sounds a little muffled.
Sure, I'm at our cooking studio doing a little spotty Wi-Fi. The main thing I say is just celebrate what you can eat, and after you feel like you've got that down, it takes 6 weeks to make it happen. So after 6 weeks or so of eating really great food that's naturally gluten-free, then start playing. That's all you really have. Baking is playing, and anyone who thinks that baking is stressful isn't a real baker. It's a joy. Even when you make mistakes, you make a cake that doesn't turn out, you learn something from it. So, you know, there's a wonderful Julia Child quote I love is, in cooking and baking, one must have a what the hell attitude. That's the only way to it.
You know, I agree with you about baking, because for me, when I think of cooking, it feels like a chore. It feels like I have to make something for dinner. Baking is like, I'm in my place. I'm with my mixer. I'm like watching something be made, and then it's so delicious.
Yeah.
So I completely agree about that. I do want to make sure that the folks who are at home, I want to make sure we give them some great tips for when they're baking. Now, let's talk about the difference with baking versus just like regular cooking, gluten-free. What are some of the key things that for baking that people have to look out for? Do you guys have like 3 tips that you can give that maybe is sort of unanimous of what most people, the first mistakes that people make? Jean, do you want to start with you?
I think the first thing that people don't expect with gluten-free baking is how different the texture of the doughs are. Bread dough in gluten-free world is more like a thick batter than anything even vaguely kneadable. So if somebody's trying to make their first loaf of gluten-free bread and they expect it to be something that they can manipulate with their hands, they'll add far more flour than is appropriate, thinking that it's not correct. The reality is we need a lot more moisture in our flours in order to rehydrate them. And at best, they look like a thick batter. And you pour it in a pan, and it only has one rise, and then you get it out of the oven, and it's amazing, but you cannot cut it hot, ever. Because a lot of our flours need that time to set the structure of the bread. And if you start to cut it while it's hot, you stop that process. I think that's the 2 things with bread. With muffins, I think people are ecstatic because they have tender, wonderful muffins with very little problems. There's no tunneling in gluten-free world unless you use a lot of xanthan gum or pixie dust or something like that, because we don't develop the gluten. There's no gluten to develop. So we have fabulous muffins without any real problem. And cookie dough, you've got to give it 24 hours in your fridge before you cook it so that it doesn't automatically spread. Again, our flours need more time to rehydrate and more time to integrate. So I think those are the 3 things that I always encourage people who are brand new. All your cookie dough needs to rest 24 hours. Muffins are the best thing to start with, and bread dough doesn't look anything like what you thought it did.
Oh, so Jean, it sounds like to me that gluten-free baking is almost like slow food movement for baking, because you have to take your time. You can't just do everything really quickly. If you look at it that way.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, because I can mix up, a batch of pancakes in exactly the same amount of time as it used to take me.
Yeah. But when it comes to baked goods, it sounds like it takes a little bit longer.
Only cookies.
Only cookies.
I make scones for breakfast at lots of mornings for my daughters, and the scones go together in 10 minutes and they bake for 20, and my daughters are walking out the door with a hot, beautiful baked good in not much more time than it normally would have taken.
Okay.
And they're gorgeous. I mean, take a peek at my Instagram stream. I tend to, I tend to snap the pictures.
Kristine, what are some of your tips? And then we'll finish with Rachel after you.
Well, let's see. One tip is to relax. Don't be nervous, because those of us who are baking gluten-free have one huge advantage over everyone else, which is we're not using gluten, and gluten is what will make things tough, and that's not going to happen, so you don't have to worry about overworking, overmixing. The next tip is there's so many gluten-free flours, I suggest starting with 1 or 2 so you're not confused. For myself, I like sorghum as a good base flour, and then slowly add in others, because some recipes, and my recipes, will sometimes call for 3 or 4 flours, which will give you wonderful results. But start with recipes that choose 1 or 2. Okay. And finally, I want to say that there are wonderful, wonderful things you can make that are naturally gluten-free that are part of the regular baking repertoire, things such as meringues and things such as sponge cakes. You can make amazing meringue cookies and beautiful pavlovas. Do you know what a pavlova is? It's like this big, fluffy cloud, and it's like crisp on the outside and marshmallowy on the inside. And I like to fill it with a lemon curd and berries. Just a wonderful dessert. And then sponge cakes, which are eggs beaten with sugar, and then you can just add a wonderful almond flour or walnut flour. So there are many things that you've all been baking all along that you can continue to bake and are fabulous.
Okay, Rachel, what about you? What are your 3 tips that you would say would be great for a beginning gluten-free baker?
Okay, so well, really quick, all of my cookies you can bake right away. So I'm not sure if it's a difference in the flours or different things like that, but I start with my almond blend or coconut blend flours, and that way it doesn't matter if it's my recipe or someone else's, you just total up the total amount of flour, then you're not having several different flours in your kitchen, and I find that really easy. But I wanted to show you guys something about breads today, because breads are like some of the hardest things to bake, so I brought a few pans to show you. A regular loaf pan like this, can you guys see that? That has a hard time holding its rise, and you have to do lots of tricks to hold its rise. And so what I have showed people is you can use a loaf pan like this. It's a French loaf pan. And the French loaf pan, it'll actually look like French bread, and it only goes about that high, but it's really long. And it actually holds its rise really nicely, and then you have really soft breads. Or you can use, don't be afraid of different pans. You can use 4-inch little spring form pans or 4-inch cake pans. They make excellent sandwich rolls. So like when you're using like a regular loaf pan and you cut it, you're getting these dinky little sandwiches. But if you use a 4-inch cake pan or a pan like this, when you slice the sandwiches, you slice this way, and you have a sandwich that is like a regular sandwich, and that is like a key. And then you can just be spontaneous with your pans. I even make bread in an angel food cake pan, and then slice it this way, and then make wedges, and you can serve a whole party. It's perfect for serving a party of guests.
I love how you're using different pans.
And then the other thing is you want to have a really good set of measuring spoons when you're getting started, ones that look really good and that will measure correctly every time. And this is my favorite tool in the kitchen. It's my 2-inch scoop. It's about 2 inches from here to there. You use it to fill all your muffins or your cupcakes. It makes no mess. You can use it to make cookies. You can use a smaller one. So when you're looking at my recipes, almost all of them say use your 1-inch scoop or your 2-inch scoop. It saves time. It makes your foods look beautiful. And so those are my biggest tips, is be flexible with your pans, have a good set of measuring spoons, a good set of measuring cups, and start with a really good flour blend and really good recipes, whether they're my recipes or your recipes or anybody's recipes. Look for the high quality recipes for success. And if you mess up, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Try again.
So Shauna, what are your tips?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, is to enjoy the heck out of it because it's baking. So, when I like to remind some people, like, nobody dies if your cookies are burnt. Nobody is going to be hurt if you make cake that's a little too tough.
Nobody will die if your cookies are burned. That's very good to know. That's very good to know.
I will think food blogs have helped in some ways because we all feel like everything has to look beautiful. But if you make cookies and they're like slightly underdone or overdone, your friends will say you've made cookies. So the other is first is just to play. I believe that hydration is really important, and I know that Jean was talking about this a little bit when I had to go off to test the mic. But letting cookie dough or something like that sit overnight in the refrigerator, it not only helps the flours to hydrate, but it helps the flavors to deepen. And this is actually a baker's trick. It's not a gluten-free baker's trick. I know the City Bakery makes this wonderful 36-hour chocolate chip cookie when I turn gluten-free. And, you can take the dough out at 12 hours and at 24 hours, but at 36 hours, the chocolate is almost kind of caramelized, the flours are really fully hydrated, and they don't have that kind of wet, raw taste anymore. And so allowing something, even muffins, make them the night before, put them in the tin, let them sit in the refrigerator. In the morning, you turn on the oven and have muffins that are warm and ready to go. So hydration is really important. And the other is cold, and this is, again, just a baking thing. So if you're going to make a pie, have cold butter, have cold flour, work fast. Scones, for example, I will make them the night before, and I put them on a baking sheet and put them in the freezer overnight. And again, it's kind of like I have 2 kids. I'm thinking about a little bit wanting to get homemade scones for Sunday morning. Make them on Saturday, pull them out of the freezer, put them right into the hot oven, and that makes them beautifully fluffy and they don't spread. And so you don't need things like xanthan gum to kind of keep binding. You just think about how to little tricks to make it easier for you.
You just said a term that I have no idea how to actually repeat it, but somebody just asked that question on our BakeSpace blog. This xanthan gum, which I didn't know how to say that at first, but now I'm glad you just did, because it says curious to hear more about baking with xanthan gum and the balance of using coconut flours. That was from Carrie Watson, who posted on our blog through Facebook. I was wondering if maybe, since you just brought that up, could you answer that, and then we'll make sure that the rest of the group can answer that question that we were already talking about.
Sure. I don't use xanthan gum or guar gum or any gums at all. I did for the first few years of baking and of writing blog posts and even of our first cookbook, first draft. But what I found was that, I feel like gluten-free baking began in a place where there were not very many flours on the market. People didn't used to have millet, sorghum, teff, buckwheat, all these wonderful flours, all of which have a lot of protein and help to build structure in those bakeries. So it used to just be white rice, tapioca, potato starch, cornstarch, none of which has protein and build any binding qualities in it. And so I think people started using xanthan gum and guar gum as a way to make up for the lack of protein and structure in those baked goods. Now that we have these other beautiful flours at our disposal, we don't have to use xanthan gum. And I found actually that xanthan gum makes baked goods gummy, in my estimation. And I found, even more particularly, my digestive system does not like xanthan gum. So about 2011, I started using it, and I found that all my baked goods were better. They were more sort of natural tasting, but even more than that, I had more fun playing with all those whole grains and almond flour and things like that. I use a little bit of psyllium husk sometimes, or flaxseed or chia, when it comes only to those baked goods where gluten is truly required. A bread dough, a pizza dough, cinnamon rolls, things that are bready. Then you have a few things at your disposal to play with to act as a binder, and mostly insoluble fibers that will kind of bind with the rest of it in cinch in. But I don't believe at all that xanthan or guar gum is required for gluten.
Now I think gluten-free mom. I think Rachel, you may have some say on that too. What do you think about that?
I think there's a lot of people who are doing all kinds of tricks to use less xanthan gum, and I think that's great. I use xanthan gum and guar gum in my recipes, but I use it in a lot less amount than, say, a lot of the traditional recipes. I think it's overused, and I am starting to experience with some, different like what Shauna was saying, different things like the psyllium and the flaxseed where you don't need it as much. I personally like it because I don't like my foods falling apart and crumbling, but I do it on a less scale. There are things that you can do in addition, like when you're using like eggs or pumpkin and things of that nature, like the mushed fruit, you don't need it as much as well. So.
That's good. Kristine, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I'd like to explain what xanthan gum is because it sounds really scary, but
it does.
It's a natural occurring product. When bacteria feeds on sugar, it's a byproduct. So it's not something that's chemically been created. It's a natural ingredient. I find I do like it. I use very, very tiny amounts. I've written 2 cookbooks, and I am still on my first package of xanthan gum, but I find just a little bit does hold things together. I've done a little bit. I've tried flaxseed a little bit, and I often don't like the flavor it adds to things. I mean, I actually enjoy flax a lot, but there's certain things I don't want that flavor in. So I use, very, like a teaspoon, a very tiny amount. And then, as I said earlier, there's so many things that are naturally gluten-free that use eggs basically to bind. And so, I like my food to be as natural as possible. So, eggs are a fabulous thing. I'm going to come back to meringues. I have to say I fell in love with meringues when I had to go gluten-free because they're just, they're just like a delight, and you can flavor them. I find I love to use different spices in the meringue dough, or I have a wonderful recipe where I melt chocolate and toast hazelnuts and a little crystallized ginger. There's meringues are endlessly variable.
That's great. I would also suggest macaroons, not the French ones, but the coconut ones. That's gluten-free.
Oh, those are so good. I love them when they're dipped in chocolate.
I'm actually making a cute little macaroon. It's a cupcake, and then on top there's a macaroon, and it looks like a little egg, like a little bird nest, and we're putting little Easter eggs in it for Easter. And that's our project this afternoon. I can't wait.
That's great.
The French ones are gluten-free too, though.
The which ones?
The French ones are gluten-free too.
Oh, they are.
Based on almond flour.
Yeah.
So you can make both kinds. There's no reason to get scared about them.
What cities are you guys all in? Because I'm trying to figure out who's closer to me where I can come and get fed by your gluten-free genius.
And
Shauna and I are Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we're near each other, so you can come up and visit us both.
And I'm in Los Angeles if you get that way.
Kristine, I'm in LA.
Oh, you are? Oh,
Yes.
I thought you were in San Francisco. Oh my goodness, we're
Wow.
neighbors.
No. We're in Hollywood. We should totally the next time you have any kind of like get together, you're making food. Please, I would love the invitation. I think, and I will eat for 2. I'll eat on behalf of Nichelle.
Okay, that's great. All right, where's Nichelle?
I'm in Atlanta. I also have a Twitter question or comment. Someone said that gray-haired lady said, I've eaten a few gluten-free baked goods, and why does it taste funny? Well, my first answer would be it's because it doesn't have wheat in it, but
Oh, no way.
I have an answer. It's because it's made with white starches and not all the wonderful whole grains that have such fabulous flavors.
Yeah.
And my answer would be that they just haven't found the right recipe yet. Because gluten-free baked goods can taste great with the right recipe.
I'm with Kristine because I think the problem is that people are so busy missing something that they're used to the look and the texture of that they end up using all of these starches, not grains, and they end up sort of nutritionally empty. There's nothing like try to eat potato starch and water. It tastes disgusting. Potato starch is useful within a mix of flours, but when you're eating something that's all white, just because it's trying to repeat what a white flour looks like, I always say, look, I broke up with gluten because he was no good for me. I don't want someone who looks just like him, okay? I want very much its own. The other thing is that gluten-free has become so ubiquitous, and erroneously people believe it's a healthier diet or it's a weight loss diet. Not at all. So, you get a lot of people just pushing stuff out there thinking, hey, it doesn't have any gluten in there. It's going to be good enough for the gluten-free people. Turn to the real bakers, and you're going to have something good.
Well,
Hey, Nichelle, before we move on, I want to make sure, before I forget this, because I forgot a couple last week, which I was kind of bummed about. This is a picture of a gluten-free brownie. Girl Savage posted this on our Instagram feed, or no, Twitter feed. Posted this on our Twitter feed with the hashtag Get Baked. So if you guys are watching at home and you have some baked goods that are gluten-free that you want to share with us, please use our hashtag, and we will start promoting them on the show every single week. But I want to make sure Girl Savage saw, and then also. Here was Gray Haired Lady's tweet, and then Cupcake Post mentioned as well. And then Melanie Weir also checked in and shared the post as well. Just Baking News also shared. Joanne Yala, which is Joanne13 on Twitter, also shared from the Cupcakes Take the Cake post as well. And Food Stamp Foodies also shared our post. So I want to make sure those folks know we are grateful for them to share our show with them.
Awesome.
I just wanted. Go ahead.
I would like to add something to what Shauna was just saying. And I think that it's a mistake to try and copy things that are best made with wheat. You want to make things that are delicious for their own deliciousness, and then you're always going to be happy.
That's actually to piggyback on what I was about to say, is that when everyone started going vegetarian, they wanted to have, soy products for everything to replicate meat. So I think that's the same thing that's going on with gluten-free. They're trying to make things that are just like wheat, as opposed to appreciating the non-wheat variety that's out there. So I think when people start taking away things out of their diet, as opposed to getting used to the new things, they really try to find, like you said, the someone like the ex-boyfriend. So I think as more people find out about gluten-free and start baking and cookbooks like you guys have, they'll get more of an idea of what they can do with what they have, as opposed to trying to replace it with something that's pretty much inferior.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a woman the other day who was very sweet, but she said, okay, my daughter just got diagnosed. She needs to be gluten-free, dairy-free, and egg-free. And I thought, okay, there's a challenge. Let's focus on the foods we have. And then she said, how do I make her hot dog buns? I said, you don't. Not at first. Like, eventually, when you become a better baker and you want to try it. But that's not the first thing you should be cooking for. There's a certain amount of common sense that needs to come in and, like, celebrate the foods you can eat. It's very, very easy for us to focus on what we can't have first. But if you can just flip it and think, what can I have? That's a good psychological trick for everything, really.
Mm-hmm. And what I encourage people to do is always think about the thing that's going to be most missed in your diet. So when I have a new patient and I've just told them, this life-changing diagnosis, I look at them and say, what do you eat frequently that would be something you just couldn't live without? Is it pizza? Is it pancakes? Is it bread? Is it hot dog buns if it's a child? And then I get them a recipe for that one thing, because what I've discovered over time is that if they can't have that one holy grail, whatever it is, they disregard the rest of the diet. They think, I can't have this one thing I really need, and then they cheat. And cheating's worse than not going gluten-free at all. I mean, if you're going to need to be gluten-free, it's lifelong. It's 100%. You don't cheat. You don't deal with an inconvenience by having a wheat product, because that can create more damage. So I always ask them that. And there are so many fabulous places on the web, cookbooks, that people can use as references. There's really no reason to not be able to find what you want. Whether or not the person has the skills to create it, Shauna's quite right. There's a lot of people that never baked to begin with, and now they get this diagnosis, and they have to learn how to bake, and then learn how to bake gluten-free, all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are making me hungry. I'm just thinking about all the baking things I want to try. I do want to say on Twitter, Nichelle, I think you've been following, but Yummy Medley said, I might start baking gluten-free baking, thanks to the Get Baked conversation. So
Aw.
It's just the beginning. We're gonna change the world one recipe at a time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I really love that. I have a sister-in-law who is gluten-free, and we pick restaurants based on if they have like a gluten-free menu. And I'm surprised at how many restaurants do that. Have you guys found bakeries starting to do that trend as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Bakeries are starting to do it. 9 years ago, you wouldn't have found a restaurant really to do that, but more and more now almost every restaurant has some sort of a gluten-free menu. But it doesn't mean it's safe. You still have to ask the chef is what are they doing to keep your product not cross-contaminated. So you still have to go in proactive and ask the questions to make sure that your product is safe for you.
What are the questions that you would ask? Like if someone's going to go into a bakery or to a restaurant?
Well, for example, if you're ordering French fries, is the French fries fried in its own oil, or is it fried in oil with fried chicken that's been made with wheat? And are you preparing my products on its own table that it's separate from the gluten-free, or are you using the same cutting mat that you would use for, cutting a hamburger bun and different things like that? Like, what steps are you doing to keep my product safe?
And the reality is if a bakery makes a gluten-full product in the same facility as their gluten-free product, there is no physical way that they've controlled the flour cloud that happens from a mixer adequately enough to make sure that it's 100% gluten-free, or as close as they can make it. It's not physically possible. And there are a lot of bakeries that say, oh, but we do this whole big clean, and we only cook at the first part of the morning. And I get all that. It's not true. There's no physical way to control the flour cloud. There's a bakery here in Bellingham that pisses me off because they say their food is gluten-free-er. Like being a little bit pregnant. It just doesn't work.
Dr. Jean, I love what you said. You said gluten cloud.
If you've ever been near a giant mixer going, there's a cloud of flour that goes out 6-8 feet from that mixer.
And it takes a couple hours for all of that to settle.
And everything in the area gets covered with that thin layer of flour.
Wow.
And there's something I'd like to bring up along that line. When someone first goes gluten-free, there's always the debate about the family, but I only have one kid who has to be gluten-free and the other doesn't. I feel very strongly that the whole family eats gluten-free. When they eat out, they can eat out whatever they want in the house. My husband does not have to be gluten-free, but he does at home. Yep. And there's so many delicious things, no one should feel they're being deprived. They don't have to feel deprived.
Kristine, I agree with you. I'm not going to make 3 different meals. I'm going to make one meal, and it's going to taste amazing, and they're all going to like it. So there's a lot of families who are like, well, I had to make this meal for this person, and this meal for this person, and this meal for this person, and I'm so tired. There's no need. Make one meal.
And I was really also addressing the gluten cloud, which to me, the cross-contamination, is just way too hard to control at home. If you're willing to make two.
Little things people wouldn't think of. For example, if you're making a sandwich for your kid and you've got a jar of mayonnaise, like you dip that into, put it onto the kid's bread, and put it back in. There are breadcrumbs in the mayonnaise. So I completely agree. One of the reasons I fell in love with my husband among many is that he's an incredibly talented chef who decided to make his restaurant gluten-free so he could feed me everything he was making that day. And we never have gluten in the house, ever. He can eat all the gluten he wants. Our 1-year-old seems to be fine with it. Our 6-year-old is not. So he would never even think of bringing gluten in the house because he doesn't want the possibility of making the rest of us sick. And, I think a lot of things about celiac and gluten-free really are psychological and not just the food, but how well we treat each other and how safe we want to keep each other and how, I walk into our kitchen and I get to play. I don't think anymore like, ugh, it could make me sick if I have that wrong drawer. And, making a space for everyone is really important.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said.
With kids, a lot of times you end up having to be their advocate at school. The horrible day of, oh my gosh, it's somebody's birthday and there are cupcakes in the classroom. I had to do it with my daughters because they were little. And of course we were in the midst of all that. And there are Dana Korn wrote a bunch of books about being the parent of a gluten-free child, and it's all about making certain that they feel as special, and it's not hard to do, and she has some great tips. But what ended up happening is that same group of kids my children went to school with back then are now sophomores in high school, and they're making their own decisions. But the group of kids that know that each other can protect their back are still friends, and they still do that. When the pizza appears after track meet for the 19th time, they know that they can say, hey, guys, you got to order us a gluten-free one. And they advocate for themselves. So that's the other side of children. Let them be their own advocates because they've got to do it someday.
Speaking of children, if you don't mind if I interrupt, my daughter, the inspiration of Gluten-Free Mama, just walked in the room. Would you guys like to say hi to her?
Sure.
Absolutely.
This is the gluten-free baby, and she's no longer a baby. And as this advocate, she has been teaching children at school about, you can hear our dogs now, I'm sorry. She goes into the school and she educates the classrooms and her grades each year about her allergies and other allergies, and even goes into the kitchen to the chef and educates them. So we can empower our children to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
That's great.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Okay, say goodbye and get the dogs.
Bye.
What's her name?
Her name's Lexi.
Aw, so sweet. Can you guys share shoes? I'm always intrigued. This is totally off topic, but I'm always intrigued when kids and parents, they get to a point where they start sharing things, like being able to multiply your shoe, the thing. I don't know. For some reason, that seems really strange. Is that a dog behind you?
In my house, it's my Saint Bernard probably. It's 150 pounds.
Oh,
But
wow.
I think they're trying to get her out.
Oh, well, she's totally welcome to stay. We are dog-friendly people here. Michelle has an adorable dog. I have 2 Chihuahuas who are actually at my feet right now, crying, not crying, but sleeping, and I'm hoping that they don't start crying or barking or anything like that. I do want to make sure we have about 10 minutes left of the show. The folks on Twitter who have said hi, Lori Moreno, Jane Evans, Bonacci retweeted, Megan McGarry retweeted also. And then let's see who else. Boston Girl Bakes, Bridges to Italy, and I think that's it for right now. But those are the folks who retweeted my tweet originally, so we appreciate you sharing the world. Let's before we end, let's make sure we go through a few real practical tips for people who are starting baking. What are some of the cool? Doesn't have to be beginner; it could be advanced tips. But what are some of the things that you want to share with folks in terms of if they're going to start a new recipe or they're going to try a new product? Maybe each person can give 3 tips that you think would be really cool.
Okay. This is Kristine speaking, and one thing, these gluten-free flours are not inexpensive, so I always put out a sheet of parchment or wax paper and measure on that. Then you just fold the paper in half and you can pour the leftover flour right back into the bag. Almond flours I keep in the refrigerator because they will go rancid very quickly. I mean in the freezer, but I take them out before. That's the first thing I do when I start baking is take them out because they will clump together. I take the flour out, I hit it a couple times with a rolling pin to loosen it up and bring it to room temperature.
Do you want to go next?
I'm sorry, the third thing is really important. Of course, it's best to measure your flours by weight, but most Americans do not have a scale. If you're not measuring by weight, it's important to discover what way the person who wrote the recipe measured, whether they scoop the measuring cup into the bag of flour, you'll get a much more flour per cup, or the way I do it, which is pour or spoon into the cup. And you need to measure the same way the recipe writer measured. Those are my 3 tips.
I got to follow since mine is about baking by weight. Honestly, people, get over it. Start baking by weight. It's just incredible. I get about every 3 days, I get someone saying, can't you just put your recipes in American, which makes me a little mortified. there's nothing complicated. I know that, if you think about a pound cake, which is one of my favorite baked goods, it's called pound cake because you need a pound of sugar, a pound of butter, a pound of eggs. Someone a long time ago used to weigh. It's kind of a modern idea that you need cups. And I remember when I started to switch to bake my weight, I asked on Twitter, which is the great, crowdsourcing, all right, can somebody weigh how much is 1 cup of gluten-free flour weigh? Because I don't have any in the house, and I want to know. And I got about 7 to 8 responses, and they were everywhere from 4 ounces to 5.5 ounces. So even when you're using wheat flour, you're not going to have a consistent weight. 140 grams is 140 grams. And as I like to say, you're always going to use fewer dishes. And gluten-free, it's really important because each of these different gluten-free flours has a different weight, different density, and they absorb liquid differently. So just saying 1 cup, substitute 1 cup of teff for 1 cup of potato starch makes no sense at all. So if you can just learn to bake by weight, it would make a big difference. The next is, again, you want to play with it. Expect that a lot of your first attempts at recipes are going to be a little funky. But if you turn to really great books, Kristine, I see you have The Italian Baker back on your shelf. I love that book. Carol Field's one of the best baking books of all time. And go to really, truly great recipes first and convert them yourself. There are a lot of great gluten-free recipes out there. But really sort of steep yourself in baking. There's a very long tradition of people who are baking with buckwheat, who are baking with almond flour, who are baking with all kinds of things and not just wheat flour. And turn to the great bakers. They are wonderful people they love to share. And the third is that almost many chocolates are gluten-free. Double check to make sure. But if all else fails and everything goes bad, just have some good time.
I'm going to second the go get yourself a scale from Shauna, because there is nothing quite so wonderful as being able to take a single bowl on a scale and add things to it, and it's kind of like alchemy. You can then create this incredible batter or dough or whatever, but it's one bowl. It's easy. It's replicatable every single time. It always comes out if you've got a recipe that's been well written by weight. It's what the professionals do. There isn't a professional bakery in the world that measures by cups. So go ahead, be professional. It's okay. And yes, you're not going to have everything come out at first, but remember the cost of your ingredients. You can make things that don't come out perfectly into something else that you're going to like better. So if your cookies go a little bit long and they're not quite burnt, but they're really dry, crumble them up and you've got the most amazing crumb crust for a cheesecake or something like that. Just replace, throw it in the freezer. You'll figure out a use for it later. And get your kids involved early. It's going to be something that they're going to need to do. And right now, I am incredibly fortunate. My girls are 16, and they're baking. They're whipping out, they're both athletes, and so they have decided that for themselves, they want no sugar, they want high protein, and they're whipping out their own treats. And I'm not necessarily baking their treats for them. Because both of them are athletes and they know what they need to fuel their bodies. And it's an incredibly powerful tool for a child to have, to be able to say, I can feed myself exactly the way I want to feed myself, and I don't have to depend on anybody making my product for me. It is we're in the top 10 food trends, guys, and that's why everybody's coming out with a gluten-free version of whatever. And most of them are just gluten-free versions of the same junk that they were making processed with wheat. So cook for yourself. You'll be in better shape.
That's great advice. I wanted to ask about these brands that are coming up with gluten-free things. Is there anything you could say for someone who is probably not getting ready to start baking right away? Is there a product out there or a brand that maybe someone might need to look to? Because I think for some people it's such a lifestyle change, because if they're not used to cooking, they're going to still go to the grocery store. So anything that you think would help?
Who do we trust?
Yeah, who do you trust?
Bob's Red Mill is a wonderful line, but everything contains xanthan gum. So for me, I love their line because it's a dedicated gluten-free facility. In other words, there's nothing gluten-containing in their gluten-free facility. So it's completely safe, but everything has xanthan gum. So I go back and forth between whether or not it's perfect. But if somebody asks me, can I make a cake for your child? I'll point them towards a Bob's Red Mill. And Pamela's is the other one I use in situations where I just can't use my own stuff. Pamela's and Bob's.
Thank you. Anyone else has anything that they would recommend?
Well, you know, the things that Danny and I decided on our website years ago, we decided we should actually make some money out of all this work. But rather than doing a traditional ad network, we found that we couldn't get a guarantee that we would not have wheat thins on our site, for example. So we created our own sponsorship network, and we work really closely with companies who send us product, and if we like them, we'll tell our readers about those, and those are published on the weekends generally. And we turn down about 85% of what we receive, which may not be a good financial model, but it certainly means that everything that goes up is a recommendation very solidly from us. And so there's actually a sponsorship page on our website, Gluten Free Girl, where you can see, you know, years worth of recommendations. I mean, generally small businesses who are really trying to do it right. For the most part, they're businesses that are trying to use just real food and no xanthan gum, or sometimes they are, it's okay too. But you know, really, really good people trying to create good work in the world, and that's one of the things we like to try to celebrate.
That's great. I think that so many people are lost, so I'm hoping a lot of people will watch this and get an understanding of what they can do. Anyone else has any tips?
I have a couple tips. Well, first of all, you know, I'm kind of biased, so I say start off with Mama's almond or coconut blend. It's the closest thing to the texture of wheat flour that you're going to get. It's light, and it's no grit. A lot of the gluten-free flours are really gritty, and there's no grit. So, of course, I'm going to support my brand. But a big thing that my consumers tell me is when they see a recipe, can I make that dairy-free? Can I make that egg-free? And so I wanted to touch base on that. And anytime you see something that calls for butter, often you can use coconut oil, you can use Spectrum buttery sticks. I recommend coconut oil first choice, or the Spectrum palm oil. It's like a shortening. It's like Crisco, but it doesn't have the soy in it, and it's non-hydrogenated. So, and anytime you see something that calls for milk, you can replace it with your almond milk, your rice milk. You can use hemp milk or soy milk or the milk of your choice. So don't be afraid when you see milk or butter to change it to what meets your needs. And as far as eggs, a great egg replacer is to grind up flaxseed. And what I recommend to equal 1 egg is you use 4 tablespoons of water with 1 tablespoon of ground flax, and you simmer it for about 5 minutes until it becomes thick, and that equals 1 egg. You can make as many of those as you want, store them in your fridge for a week, and that way you don't have to go back to it and do it fresh each time if you don't have time for that. So you can alter recipes, and it's okay. And you can, on my website, you can find all the tips for egg-free baking and dairy-free baking to help accommodate you as well.
That's awesome. That's it. Because I gave up. I'm a vegetarian, and I've given up dairy. That's fine. The eggs and baked goods, I've had a really hard time making that transition because I'm like, oh, it's a perfect cupcake. I must eat it. So that's really good to know, and I love flaxseed, so I'm happy about that. I want to make sure everyone knows we're going to be closing up shop here in about 2 minutes or so. I want to make sure people know where to find everyone online. So if they've been watching the show, if they have any questions post-show or as their gluten-free world evolves, where can folks find you online? Shauna, do you want to start with you, and then we'll just go down the list?
Sure. Our website is glutenfreegirl.com, Gluten-Free Girl and the Chef, and we have, you know, over 1,000 recipes for the last 10 years, as well as we just debuted our flour line on Wednesday, so go buy some flour, please.
Congratulations.
I'm actually surrounded by boxes and boxes that are ready to go out tomorrow morning. So, and I've also on Twitter, Instagram. You can ask me questions any of those places.
You know, Shauna and Rachel, I want to have you guys come back on another show that we're going to do about starting your own food product. So, will you guys come back and
Sure.
chat about that experience?
She knows more than I do. I've got lots to learn from her, but yeah, I would love to.
Awesome. That would be great. Well, we'll get you guys back on again. We will see if Nichelle will join me on that show. Kristine, where can people find you, and what are you doing now? What's happening in your world?
Well, in my world, I'm promoting my latest cookbook, which is gluten-free baking. So I'm speaking at a lot of gluten-free fests right now. I have a blog, which is KristineKid.com, and that's Kristine with a K and Kid with 2 D's. I'm working on another cookbook idea, but I'm not talking about that yet, and I do a little consulting as well. Oh, and I have a Craftsy video on gluten-free Italian classics, and that's Craft SY, and it's a website that has wonderful high-quality videos on crafts and on cooking, and so I have a gluten-free Italian cooking class.
Awesome.
Now, Jean, Dr. Jean, do you want to go next?
Oh, sure. I'm Dr. Jean Layton on Twitter, and everywhere else it's just plain Jean Layton on Instagram and Facebook. Here on Google Plus, I'm Gluten-Free Doctor as a page and Jean Layton as a profile, and you'll find me that way everywhere. My other site is Half Hour Social Media, because that's how I can get people sharing their world and their needs social media-ly, and yeah, easy to find me.
And then, Rachel, I think you're our last one.
Okay, well, it's pretty easy, Gluten-Free Mama, so you just go to glutenfreemama.com. All my social media is Gluten-Free Mama 1, so it'd be whatever 1. And then you can also now find me on the new network, Sue, tsu.co, under Gluten-Free Mama.
You know, I could just see that conversation when you're like, gluten-free mama, oh, +1. Because I could imagine on social media that gets pretty frustrating because you've built such a brand and you've built such an experience. Are you not able to get the...
No, somebody like long time ago that they aren't even active, they took it, but everybody has learned Gluten-Free Mama 1. And even when they type up Gluten-Free Mama, I'm the first to pop up, so it's fine.
There you go. Well, that's awesome. Cool. All right, Nichelle, anything you want to add?
No, I just want to thank all the panelists. I've learned a lot today.
You're welcome. I feel like now I can go and start baking in a gluten-free world, and I don't have to feel like I'm substituting in a negative way. It's like substituting in a way where I'm going to explore new flavors and explore new products, and that there's ways to get around the egg issue, there's ways to get around the texture issue, and to not be afraid of trying it. So I'm going to try, I think maybe next weekend I may try to make my first recipe totally gluten-free. If my sister-in-law gets back from her trip, I may bring it over to her house and surprise her and say, this is actually gluten-free. you
can do it. You can do it.
It doesn't like a lot of calories, so it'll be kind of funny to be like, you can't use the gluten as the excuse now. You must eat this. It's like 500 calories, so we'll see. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We have another show next Sunday. Every Sunday we're at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Our next show is on chocolate, which is really exciting. And then let me just tell you a couple of the other shows that are coming up as well. We have cookies on April 12th, creative baking on April 19th, and I think we have Cake Spy joining us that day. We have breads and pizzas, Mom's Favorite Recipes. We're doing a Mother's Day show where we're going to invite some of our mothers to come on to the show as well. We're doing a paleo baking, cupcakes vegan. Basically, every Sunday there's going to be something very cool. So I want to thank our guests so much for coming to the show, and hopefully we'll have you guys on again. If you guys enjoy any of the other topics that we're covering, please make sure you let us know, and we'll get you back on the show as well. Nichelle, anything you want to add?
I just want to say, don't be afraid to do some gluten-free baking if you're just starting out, and buy all of these ladies' books because they all have books. So that's what you should do. Add them to your book wish list.
You know, will you guys, when we end the show, maybe sometime over the next 24 hours, will you guys put out a link to your books on Amazon or wherever you prefer to sell them through the hashtag Get Baked, because we'll add that to our Storify. Just the folks who are following along for like the next 24 hours. Will you guys share those?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, guys. We will see you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Nice to see all you guys again.
You're right.